This is an overview of Sanskrit causatives. What they mean, how they're formed, and how we use them. First of all, their meaning. If you have a basic verb to X or to do X, then the causative of that means to cause someone to do X, to make someone do X, to have someone do X. You'll find that very often to cause someone to do X is an excellent first or sort of dummy translation that you use while you're still trying to make sense of a sentence. But once you have made sense of that sentence, you may very well choose to go for a slightly different, more individual translation to arrive at something more idiomatic. A couple of examples. The verb to sit down has a causative to cause someone to sit down. This may mean that you force them to sit down, or that you invite, that you ask them to sit down, that you allow them to sit down. The basic verb to hear or to listen would have a causative that means to cause someone to hear or to listen. And this may mean you invite someone to hear or to listen, or you force them to hear, to listen to you, i.e. to obey you. Note, there will be a small amendment to what I just said later, because there is one other way in which we can translate causatives, but I'll come back to that in section 3 when we look at causative constructions. Now, forms, what do we have? There's the present active and middle. There's the present passive. There's the infinitive, the absolutive, the ta-participle. There's also a perfect. And within the present system, we have not just the present indicative, we also have the present potential, and we also have causative forms of the imperfect indicative. The basis of all causatives is a verbal root in the lowest grade, in the lowest vowel grade needed to create a heavy syllable, which usually means that the root stands in guna or sometimes in vritti. Quick reminder, there are 3 vowel grades, 0 grade, guna, and vritti, which consist of the vowel itself, a plus the vowel, or a plus the vowel. So, for example, vocalic guna, ar, vritti, ar. And if you want to read up on that properly, you can do so, for example, in chapter 7 of the Cambridge Intro to Sanskrit. Also, another quick reminder, in Sanskrit we have light and heavy syllables. Light syllables end in a short vowel. Heavy syllables end in anything else. So a long vowel, a complex vowel, e, I, o, au, or a consonant. And again, if you want to read up on that a little more, take a look at chapter 2a in the Cambridge Intro to Sanskrit. Now, let's look at the present active, the finite present active forms, which probably are the most frequently used causatives, and because they're so very similar, also the present middle forms. In order to create those, we take, as I mentioned, a verbal root in the lowest grade necessary to produce a heavy syllable. We add the suffix aya, and we add a personal ending. So, for example, of the verbal root wish, to enter, present tense wishati, we have a causative veshayati. Of darsh, to see, present tense pashyati, we have a causative darshayati. Of bhar, to carry, present tense bharati, we have a causative bharayati. What's happening here? Well, if you take a look at wish, if you use that root in the 0 grade, it would give you vishayati, vishayati. The first syllable would be vi, which ends in a short vowel. That would be light. We don't want a light first syllable. We want a heavy syllable. How do we get that heavy syllable? If we put wish into guna, wish, then we have veshayati. We ends in a complex vowel, e, and so we, the first syllable, is heavy, which is exactly what we want. Similarly with darsh. Darshayati, again, the root stands in guna, darsh, gives us darshayati. Dar ends in a consonant, therefore that's a heavy syllable, which is exactly what we want for the causative. Bhar, to carry, if I put that into guna, it would give me bhar, bharayati. Bharayati, bharayati, would have a light first syllable. That's not what we want. So we take the root and put it one grade higher, vrti bhar, which gives us bharayati. And there we go, we have our heavy initial syllable. The same also works for the middles. As always, middles have the exact same stem as the active, they just have a different ending, the mediopassive ending. So instead of veshayati, I have veshayate. Instead of darshayati, I have darshayate. Instead of bharayati, I have bharayati. And as always, the middle is translated into English in basically the same way as the active. So veshayati or veshayati makes enter, darshayati, darshayati makes see, bharayati, bharayati makes carry. Then, as I mentioned, we have other causative forms in the present system. So, for example, from wish to enter, we have not only the present indicative veshayati, but we also have the imperfect indicative aveshayat, using the same stem, the present tense stem, veshaya, with the a, the augment in front of it, and a t, the secondary ending for the third person at the back. Veshayati makes enter, aveshayat made enter. And we also have the present potential, veshayet, he, she, it would, could, might make someone enter. Then we have two exceptions to what I just told you. The first one concerns just one verb, and I'm mentioning it here because that verb appears in the causative reasonably frequently, and this is the verb gam, to go. We might expect a causative gamayati with a heavy initial syllable, but instead we get gamayati with the root gam appearing in guna. And so we get gamayati. Ga is a light syllable, and in spite of that, we find gamayati only quite rarely. The regular form is gamayati. He, she, it makes someone go. The other exception is more systematic. It concerns roots whose citation form ends in a long a, such as sta, to stand, da, to give, dha, to put, and so on. And what's happening here is that we don't have sta ayati and da ayati, because those would just merge to stayati, dayati. And presumably, we can't tell for certain, but this is what we guess, is that stayati, dayati weren't felt to be recognizable enough as causatives. And so what we find instead is stapayati, dapayati. We have a p inserted between the root and the aya, which doesn't change the meaning of the form. It just serves the function of keeping the root, sta and da, separate, nicely recognizably separate from this suffix aya. So stapayati, he causes to stand, dapayati, causes to give, and so on. Then we have present passives. For those, we use the same root form as in the active and the middle, but then we add to them the suffix ya, which is also what we find for regular passives, and whatever mediopassive verbal ending we need. For example, from wish, I have an active causative veshayati. I keep the root form wish. Instead of aya, I add ya, and then instead of the active third singular ending ti, I add the mediopassive third singular ending te. So instead of veshayati, I have veshyate. Of darsh, darshayati, darshyate. Sorry, not of darsh, of drsh. We have darshayati, darshyate. Of bhar, to carry, bharayati, bharyate. Same form of the root, but we add not aya, but ya, and then our ending. And the same applies to sta. Here we have the sta plus this p surviving. Then instead of the aya, we have our passive ya, and our third singular ending te, stapyate. Veshyate is made to enter. Darshyate is made to see. Bharyate is made to carry. Stapyate is made to stand. Then, infinitives and absolutives. For these, we take the same stem as for the present active or middle, namely veshaya. But in this veshaya, we take the final a and replace it by an I, giving us veshayi. And to that, we then add our infinitive or absolutive suffix, veshayitum, to cause to enter, veshayitva, having caused to enter. From darsh, darshayati, we take the stem darshaya, turn it into darshayi, and then add the suffix darshayitum, to cause to see, darshayitva, having caused to see. From stapayati, we take stapaya, the stem, change it into stapayi, and then add our suffix stapayitum, to cause to stand, stapayitva, having caused to stand. For the ta participle, we do something slightly different. We again keep the root in the same grade in which it also appears in, for example, the present tense, but we don't keep the entire present tense stem. We don't keep veshaya. Instead, we just keep vesh. We add an I to it and our suffix ta, and we get veshita, having been made, having been caused to enter. Darsh, darshayati, we don't keep darshaya, we keep just darsh, add I, and then add ta, darshita, having been made to see. Stapayati, we don't keep stapaya, we just keep stap. To that we add an I, and our ta, stapita, having been caused to stand. So, infinitives, absolutives, and ta-participles of causatives always have itum, itva, and ita. You may remember that in classical Sanskrit, these forms can have tum or itum, twa or itva, ta or ita. And just by looking at a verb, you don't know, by looking at a verbal root, you don't know whether you're going to get an infinitive in tum or an infinitive in itum. An infinitive in an absolutive in twa or an absolutive in itwa, or ta-participle in ta or ta-participle in ita. With causatives, you can be certain that you always have itum, itwa, and ita. So, for example, from wish, veshayitum, veshayitwa, veshita, or from per, bharayitum, bharayitwa, bharita. Then, if you want to form a perfect of a causative, you can't actually use the regular perfect formation, you know, the one where you take the root and you reduplicate it. Because if you did that, then you would use the same verbal root for the perfect of a simple verb as for the perfect of a causative verb. You know, the causative of a verb is based on the same verbal root as the simple form of the verb. And if I use the same perfect form for both of them, for the simple verb and for the causative, I wouldn't know whether my perfect is a causative perfect or a simple perfect, because as I say, they go back to the same root. And so, with causatives, for the perfect, we use this so-called periphrastic perfect. Periphrastic basically is a fancy term that means consisting of more than one word. So in order to express the perfect active of a causative, you take the present causative stem and you add am to it. And then as an auxiliary, you add the perfect active form of as or bhu or kur. So if you want to have a third singular, perfect active, you take causative stem plus am plus the third singular perfect active form of as or bhu or kur. So for example, if you take the verb shru, shrunoti, to hear, this has a causative shravayati. Notice again we have the root in vrti, because if I had it just in guna, shravayati, then the first syllable would be light, and that's something that we generally want to avoid in the causative. So the causative, shravayati, has a stem, shravaya, to which I add am. Shravaya plus am gives me shravayam, and to that I then add, for example, the third singular perfect active form of as, bu or kur, which is asa or babhuva or chakara, which then means he, she, or it caused someone to hear. So perfect active, past active. you can find the same thing with the perfect middle. There you have the same stem, causative stem plus am, plus as your auxiliary, the perfect middle of cur. And again, if you want to form a third singular causative perfect, you take a third singular perfect middle form of cur. If you want to form a third plural, you take a third plural perfect middle form of cur, and so on. For example, from shru, shrunoti to here, causative shravayati. You have the stem shravaya, you add am, giving you shravayam, and then you add, for example, the third singular perfect middle of cur, which is chakre, and that then means, again, he, she, or it caused someone to hear. Again, the middle is basically translated in the same way as the active. Then, let us look at constructions. How do we use these forms? If you take a verb such as cur, karoti, to do, to make, you have a causative karayati. Notice again we have cur not in guna but in vrti, because if we just had guna, karayati, we would have a light first syllable, ka. We want a heavy syllable, and so we have karayati. And this then means causes someone to make something. However, karayati can also mean causes something to be made by someone. So one and the same form can either mean causes to make or causes to be made. What do I mean by that? Well, if I have a simple sentence such as Devadatta katan karoti, Devadatta makes a mat, I can take karoti, the simple verb, turn it into a causative, karayati, and then have a sentence such as Yajñadatta Devadatta katan karayati. Yajñadatta causes whom, Devadatam, accusative, to make, whom or what, katan, accusative, a mat. However, we also find Yajñadatta Devadattena katan karayati. So we find the same sentence, but Devadatta stands in the instrumental. What can we make of that instrumental? The instrumental is what expresses, among others, the agent of a passive. So apparently what we're looking at here is a sentence that means Yajñadatta causes a mat, katan, to be made, Devadattena, by Devadatta. So karayati, depending on what construction it's used with, may either have to be translated as causes someone to make something, or as causes something to be made by someone. The difference, the functional difference between the two is not entirely clear. It seems to be about emphasis, who you want to focus on. So, for example, you cause him to make a mat, or so you cause Devadatta to make a mat, or you cause a mat to be made. Oh, by the way, by Devadatta. So it seems to be a question of focus or emphasis. But there is no clear dividing line. We have the same thing for the passive. If I have Katto Devadattena kriyate, a mat is made by Devadatta, I can take this passive kriyate, replace it by the causative passive karyate, and have a sentence such as Yajñadattena Devadatta katan karyate. By Yajñadatta, Devadatta is caused to make whom or what, katan, a mat. Devadatta is the subject. He is caused to make something. Whom or what? A mat. However, we also have sentences such as Katach Devadattena karyate. A mat is caused to be made by Devadatta. Here Katach is the subject. A mat is caused to be made by whom? Devadatta in the instrumental. And again, the difference between the two constructions seems to be one of emphasis or focus. Devadatta is caused to make a mat, as opposed to a mat is caused to be made by Devadatta. And when you look at this final sentence, Katto Devadattena karyate, it's actually ambiguous, because it could both mean a mat is caused to be made by Devadatta, or it could mean a mat is caused by Devadatta to be made by someone else. When you look at this sentence in isolation, it seems potentially ambiguous, but actually you'll find whenever you see a regular sentence in a regular text, which provides context, the context will make it quite clear who is making whom do what. So, kārayati can both mean someone causes someone to make something, and someone causes something to be made by someone. And the passive kāryate can both mean someone is caused to make something, and something is caused to be made by someone. One active form, two translations, one passive form, two possible translations. Now finally, a quick overview. If you have the verb wish to enter, you have present active causative veshayati, middle veshayate, an imperfect aveshayat, a potential veshayet, a passive, present passive veshyate, an infinitive veshayitum, an absolutive veshayitva, a ta-participle veshita, and a perfect active veshayam asa or babhuva or chakara, and a perfect middle veshayan chakre. If you want to read up on causatives, you can do so, for example, in the Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit in Chapter 7. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this video useful.